I'll go ahead and hit it. Okay, I'm going live, and Periscope is having trouble. Live on Facebook, live on YouTube, not on but it's running weird. It's hitching up the same way it did in things we've had problems with before. So keep an eye on the refresh. All right, should be good to go now. I don't know what is the deal with Periscope. It's something with the bit rate. I don't know if your bit rate is too high. The max is that's what it's pinging. I'm gonna close it. You know what I'll do? I'll shut it down and then do it again. Yeah, that's max. Yeah, that would do it. I'm having trouble here. Oh, our audio is live, evidently, if you want to hit that. Hey everybody, we're still working this out. I don't see Greg next to me as we're going live, but we're just gonna go ahead and wing it. Welcome back. I'm here to talk birds with you. Greg, whenever you come on and whenever you can figure out how to make you hear me. I don't know if you can even hear me. There he is. Greg, welcome. I'm back. You're back. Let's talk about some birds here on a Friday afternoon. I don't think Greg can hear me because he's not responding to anything I'm saying.
I am. Hang on.
No, there we are. All right, great. So, hey, folks, I'm back after a week away. I want to thank Greg and Ted Floyd, my colleagues here at the ABA, for covering for me while I was out of town on my quasi vacation, such that any of us could be said to have vacations when we are have access to computers at all times. But I'm excited to be back to talk birds with everybody. How you doing, Greg? What's up?
I'm doing good, and yeah, thanks for bearing with us as you got to see how the sausage is made here. This whole broadcasting system is kind of held together with spit and baling wire.
And then we up and changed it, which made it so that
Yeah, well, we're figuring it out on the fly
it
here
looks
as we're
better.
going.
It looks beautiful.
Ah, thanks.
Hello, everybody.
And
Hello, everybody here.
I'm gonna pull up the window here so I can try to see if I can view the there. I can view the comments now as well.
Because that's how I was trying to get a hold of you.
And if someone in the audience there in the comments could just comment that you can hear us both clearly, that would be awesome.
Otherwise,
but I'm going to assume.
Otherwise,
I'm
we're
going to
ready to
assume you
go
can.
whenever you are. Yes, I hope so. I can hear you. You can evidently hear me. That is, we got that at least.
Yeah. So how was vacation? You had a great bird.
Super, yeah. It's always good to get out to the coast here in North Carolina. Anytime you have a state with a coastline, I would encourage you to go out there in the winter. It was fantastic. I saw a lot of really cool stuff. Highlighted, of course, by this North Carolina's fourth McGillivray's warbler. I was not, I will say I sort of had a feeling that there was going to be something good out there.
Sure.
No, late November, early December is typically a really good time to find birds,
and especially someplace like the Outer Banks.
Yeah, and we've had just such an amazing last month here in North Carolina and all across the East. Honestly, the rarity situation has been absolutely incredible. Everywhere you go, like across the ABA area, it's been a pretty wild year. We're at the point of the year where we try and take stock of all that stuff, and it's very easy. I was looking back at the old RBI, so I write these rare bird alerts for the American Birding Association every week, where I just sort of collate all the rare birds that are seen. And earlier in this year, the first half of the year, things were actually really slow. And I was writing rare bird alerts that had like 4 or 5 birds on them, which is really ridiculously slow. But ever since, so they all started with the eared quetzals in Arizona, and that was when things started happening, and that was when the ball started rolling down the hill. And I don't know whether it's because any sort of weather phenomenon is going on. You might have more to say about that than I do, but or the fact that there are just so many people out looking at birds and during the week or from home. There's a lot of great feeder birds that are being seen. I'm sure that plays a role, or it's little of column A, little of column B, but there's something going on. There's a lot of people finding good birds. Unusual.
I think
birds.
it's a combination of all of the above. I think that there's just a lot more people out birding, as you said. But I think we've also had an extraordinary year as far as weather. Forest fires, hurricanes,
tropical storms.
Just all of it is just happening in 2020. Yeah. It's 2020.
The one saving grace has been that there have been a lot of people birding and a lot of birds to be found. And I know that we always try and focus on the unusual stuff, but the growth of birding is real. A lot of people are out looking for birds. There's really been no better year to get involved in birding and
absolutely,
and not least of which because we're doing these every 2 weeks.
Yeah. So let's get into this.
So for those who may not have known, ever since last week, I have passed off the responsibility for finding all the rare birds, all the birds for this photo quiz type thing that we do off to Greg. So I have only very briefly seen some of these birds, and I will tell you that I was wrong on at least 2 of them. So I don't get to play that I know what I'm talking about anymore.
So here we go.
Yeah, let's do it. All right, should I tell you my first impression of this bird?
It was probably the same as mine.
Yeah. When I look at this photo, I said, Greg, is this another one of those Pacific Slope flycatchers? Of which we've been seeing a lot of on the East Coast, and no one really wants to handle because they are so notoriously difficult. But it is not.
And that's when I got into this post on what's this bird. I looked at this and I had the same initial impression as you did. I'm just like, okay, all of you guys that are commenting on this are wrong. And then I looked at it a little closer, and
one of those.
The initial observer was throwing out Vireo. And now obviously they saw this bird better, longer than we have here. And this is a great example of how a single image or even a couple of still images can really throw you off. But the first impression here is flycatcher, and looking at it closely, I'm like, okay, boy, that bird does have kind of a hefty bill. I'm not really seeing the gray feet of a Vireo.
The wing bars that you see on there are not,
colors
as prominent as you think.
And I was going towards northern beardless tarannulate. This is in a part of Texas, I believe, where that species is not found. But hey, this year.
Who knows?
And it's a Hutton's Vireo.
Yeah. So when I think of Hutton's Vireo, the classic, confusion species with Hutton's Vireo is ruby-crowned kinglet.
Yes.
Right? It's they're very similar in appearance, in behavior. They kind of are little, small, round, flitty birds. Although Hutton's Vireo obviously less so than ruby-crowned kinglet, which is exceptionally small and flitty. But when it's sitting like this, that sort of very upright posture, which is what we associate obviously with flycatchers rather than Vireos, which are much more horizontal. And as you say, when someone points out that, maybe take a second look at that, there are some things that stand out. That bill, for instance, is short and black. It's black all over. Most Impidinax flycatchers have a pale mandible.
Yeah, and the tarannulate actually has the yellow that kind of creeps up onto the upper part of the bill too. But looking at this bird, there's a couple of things that kind of jump out and don't seem right for flycatcher. And on the one on the left, you see how the edgings of the flight feathers are green. There's no flycatcher that has green. They're all gray or white. There's
that's
no
a ruby-crowned
that
kinglet
has
thing.
green.
That's a thing that you would see on a ruby-crowned kinglet, and why you would mistake a Hutton's Vireo for a ruby-crowned kinglet in normal times.
Exactly. And then the other thing here that we see in both pictures, and especially the one on the right, is how the eye ring is broken at the top. And that is, of our Vireos, there's 2 that show
really
that.
Yeah.
And that's Hutton's and thick-billed.
Probably
are the 2 Vireos that show that.
Texas, though. Never say never.
Never say never.
Yeah.
Well, that wasn't supposed to click so fast, but there we are. Here's the next bird.
Yeah. So this is the other one I got wrong.
Okay.
You looked at it.
You looked at it.
Well, now that I'm looking at it more closely, I see exactly. I probably would have gotten it right had you given me more than like 3/4 of a second to make my impression on it. But so things to look at on this bird. It's obviously a heron. Well, I want to say obviously, but the things that
Ted Floyd would start with an owl.
Yeah.
So
what are we looking at? We're looking at a very well, the legs are very long.
Yes.
And the bill, though we can't see the bill very well, it does give the impression that it is sort of longer and, well, I can't say stouter because owls and hawks have pretty stout bills, but they certainly aren't as long as this bird is. So those are the first things that stand out to me and make me think heron as opposed to any sort of raptor. Also, I can't really see the tail very much, and I would think on just about any raptor that tail would be extending beyond the wingtips.
Yeah, you would see something.
Mm-hmm.
And just looking at the general impression of this bird, it gives that just leave me alone and get away from me impression, which night herons do so well.
I was going to say, to be fair, a lot of us sort of have that going on these days. But yeah.
The other things we see here is
night heron.
is that really thick, chunky, all black bill. And then the patterning on this bird is really sparse. It's mostly dark with little whitish dots on the tips of the scapulars and the tips of the coverts. And the legs are kind of long. I mean, you can't see the feet, but that's a pretty long shanked bird. So all of that adds up to a yellow-crowned night heron.
Yeah, that's where I'm leaning on this too, and the reasons for me similar to the ones that you've come to the conclusion you've come to. That bill, we a few weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, I like time has no meaning anymore, but we did a night heron that had. Was a little more difficult, and I think one of the reasons it gave me it was a yellow crowned as well, but one of the reasons that it gave me such a black crowned night heron feel was because the bill on that bird was not as dark and stout. It was much longer bill, and it was sort of bicolored, which is sort of what we see in a black crowned night heron, darker on top, lighter on the bottom, and kind of curved. But this one, clearly does not have. That's very obviously a yellow-crowned night heron bill. Even though the plumage here, that sort of pale belly, a little bit darker in the breast, that is something I typically associate with black-crowned night heron more than yellow-crowned night heron. But the bill, the small dots on the back and on the wings, definitely yellow-crowned. And I love the fact that this bird is in a long legs, and I love the fact that this bird is sitting in a conifer, because night herons are sort of notorious for perching in not very herony sort of places. You think of a lot of herons being in a marsh. Night herons aren't always there. Like, they'll roost in very strange places, and in fact, I've had experiences with night herons where they nest actually in established like a big tree in an old neighborhood, not close to any sort of water at all. Like, they're notorious for that sort of thing, so they can be anywhere.
Yeah, there's a park in southern Illinois in Granite City that there's no water. I mean, there's water a few miles away, the Mississippi River and the backwaters and all that. But it's just there's all this activity going on in this park. There's people playing soccer and baseball and music and everything else. And right over their heads, there's yellow-crowned night herons sitting on nests.
Yeah, back when I was in Orange County in Chapel Hill.
Oh, I was going to say, and they don't form colonies like black crown.
No, they don't. Yeah, they're by
so
themselves.
they don't get in there. They don't create such a mess that everybody knows they're there.
Yeah, I'm thinking. Back when I lived in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, in Orange County, I got my county yellow-crowned night heron that was on a nest in an old neighborhood, and I pulled into the neighborhood with all these kind of large and kind of expensive houses. And I pulled out my scope, and I was sitting there in the street with my scope pointed up at the bird in the tree. And obviously some neighbors came out and was like, what exactly are you looking at here? And, fortunately I'm like a white guy, so they didn't call the cops, but
we laugh, but we shouldn't laugh. We shouldn't laugh, right? Because it's not funny.
Situation, but
it's not funny.
Some kids came out and they looked at it, and it's just a weird place to see a heron. It seems to be a very yellow crown thing.
Yeah, and Chris Ortega chimes in that his lifer black-crowned night heron, which is his spark bird, which is awesome, was parked on a street light in the middle of a plaza. And they do stuff like that, just like Nate and now Chris is saying, you'll find them in strange places.
Yeah, black-crowned night heron is one of the few species of bird that's found on 6 of the 7 continents. So take that little bit of trivia along with you.
Okay, we're gonna try to move on. Move on to the next bird here. Let's see if that works. Hey, that worked. What do we got here, Nate?
Okey-dokey. So clearly we've got a feeding station, someone's deck, snowy backyard in New York. This is probably recent. They had a bunch of snow up there. Things that I'm noticing about this is that it is on the ground. It's scratching away looking for seeds down there, and the stripes on the head, the sort of roundish body, relatively clean breast and underparts, long tail, just very chunky, very large. And I don't know, I'm leaving off the most obvious thing. It's got a white throat.
Yeah.
White-throated sparrow, but a real dark one, one of those tan ones. I don't know whether or not that's actually the bird or the photo.
I didn't.
Shutter speed is too fast or whatever. But
I didn't try to light it up. I can lighten these up in Photoshop, but I tend not to try to do that because that's not what the people on What's This Bird are seeing. So we put them up here just as they were posted to the group. And those head stripes, there's a lot of brown birds that have head stripes. Not very many as bold as that, but none with the nice bright white throat of an adult white-throated sparrow like we have here. And it's a common bird at feeders in the winter. When you have heavy snow. So now, in New York and so on, where it just got a lot of snow, you're going to have birds like white-throated sparrows that would normally be kicking around in the leaves are going to be up on your feeders.
Right. Mostly in the eastern part of the continent. We're going to be accused of East Coast bias here, but
no, we're not.
There's other many of these.
There's some goodies coming up here for the West
We got some Western birds coming up. But yeah, this is primarily an Eastern phenomenon. But yeah, there's a lot of them around right now. And as the snow starts to come down, as the weather, they're going to come to easy food sources, feeders. This is a very common feeder bird this time of year for much of the eastern 2/3 of the continent, for sure.
Okay. Is that going to go? There we go.
It's duck time. It's duck fall. Ducks are moving.
So, every year at this time, we get a lot of ducks, and we get a lot of these ducks. And the sort of pale gray in the middle, dark at both ends, describes a lot of ducks. And the colloquial name for this species is BlueBill.
That doesn't really help us.
It doesn't help us.
Well, it helps us a little, but not enough.
A little. But, that kind of grayish back and whitish flank with dark head and breast and dark butt, that's a Scop. And other birds... I was going to say... Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
One of my birding mentors, very early when I started birding, described these things as Oreo birds. Because when you see them at a distance on a lake or something, dark in front, dark on the back, white in the middle, they look like Oreos.
Yeah. So, and Tim Jasinski pops in here in the comments with LESC, which is the Bander's code for lesser Scop, and that is what this bird is. But let's talk a little bit about why. And
this is a good photo because it shows one of the classic field marks that people hear about this bird and how misleading it actually can be.
Mm-hmm. And so here is a comparison that I made of lesser and greater Scop with the lesser on the right and the greater on the left, and a little inset up there. And a couple of things we're looking for here. So you'll notice this bird doesn't have the little sort of peak on the back of the head that the previous photo had. But one thing you can do with these two birds is notice the placement of the eye in the head. And if you've got this on a bigger screen, if you're watching this, stare at the eye of the bird on the left, and then quickly shift and do the same to the bird on the right. And you'll notice...
Is this one of those tricks where you stare at the wall and it is a white-headed duck with a dark middle?
No, this is the one where the ghost comes flying out of the closet.
Yeah, right.
No, but you'll notice that the greater Scop on the left, the eye is placed higher on the head and further back. than the lesser scop on the right.
Yeah, it definitely gives you a different
there's
expression.
there's more distance between the eye and the forehead, which is what's pointed out in the inset. And once you get familiar and comfortable with looking for that, it becomes it's pretty noticeable. The other thing to notice here is the size of the nail on the tip of the bill.
I was just going to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if you go back to that previous picture.
Let's see if I can go back here. There we go.
Yeah, thank you. So when you look at this bird, one of the classic field marks that you see illustrated in field guides, even though they tell you if you actually read the text not to pay much attention to it, is the iridescence on the bird's head, and a lot of times in illustrations you'll see greater scop with like a purplish sheen and a lesser scop with a greenish sheen. Well, as you can see on this bird has a greenish sheen. It's pretty obvious, and all of that is the function of the light. It's not actual color in the bird's head, so that depending on where the sun is and where the photographer is and where your binoculars are, like, it can give you a couple different looks. So that color that you see illustrated is not a very good field mark at all. So you throw that out, discount it. But the first thing that stands out to me when I look at this bird is the bill actually looks sort of small and narrow, and especially that black tip, what Greg called the nail early on. It's real small and narrow, real skinny. And if you want to go back to the photo of the comp photo with the greater and the lesser scop, you can see even in those photos, and this is usually a field mark that stands out in almost every one you can see, that lesser is going to be real skinny. But the greater bill, the nail is going to be pretty wide, so wide that on a profile pic like this, you can actually see it kind of spreading out off from the tip. And of course, the bill itself kind of looks much more spatulate and wider at the tip, which is true to form. I mean, that's what you see on those birds.
Yeah, it is overall just a bigger, heavier bill, and the gestalt of the head is just different because of all those things we've been talking about.
Yes. Yeah, it's all part of just the impression that you get on that bird, and all these little field marks that when you get a good look at it, you can start to pick out these individual field marks and stuff that we're pointing out. But, even if you get kind of a quick look, if you see enough of these birds, you'll be able to kind of get, at least, if not 100% certain, a good sense, a good lean, a good inkling of what you're looking at, and sort of be able to tell from that. And it'll point you in the right direction if it doesn't get you all the way there.
And one other thing too is that these birds themselves definitely know the difference, and they tend to hang out together.
Hang out in different places,
but they also do mingle. Do mingle, and when you do get them mingling, spend some time and look at the differences.
What I find really funny about these birds, at least, you live on the Great Lakes where you have big flocks of like both scop frequently.
Yes,
where I live down in the southeast, I usually think of greater scop as more of a saltwater bird, although this is not a cut and dried thing. The lesser scop will be a freshwater bird, but in places like in the Triangle of North Carolina, there are ponds that every single year will have greater scop on them, with very few lesser scop. And then you'll go to the other reservoirs and it'll be almost all lesser scop. And I don't know, just kind of having that sort of localized information is really useful. But you figure these things out as you bird more. Spencer England points out.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. So he says, is the cleaner white side a normal trait to be aware of for the greater scop? I would say it's one of those field marks that is generally good, but I wouldn't use it as the only field mark. It's one of those kind of supporting field marks that, leads you more in the right direction than something that's going to get you every single time.
Yeah. And, just like we were talking about the color of the heads, the angle of the bird to the light, the amount of clouds in the sky, whether the sun is overhead or, low, all of those things change the way that kind of gray, because it's not white, it's gray. But it's created by very fine gray and white vermiculation on the feathers. And
it's really neat.
It is really neat when you see one of those feathers up close. It's really quite beautiful. Okay, so let's
Cool, good. A lot of scops around. Good bird.
let's go back to something you might
classic.
see in your backyard at the feeder.
Yeah.
What the heck is this?
Yeah, so this is a bird that we see on What's This Bird a lot this time of year, especially as the weather gets bad and more birds show up that you wouldn't necessarily think of as feeder regulars start showing up because they're taking advantage of an easy food source. So a lot of people see this bird and they'll think, "Oh, look at all those streaks! It's brown and streaky. This is a sparrow." But there's a few things that you want to look at that show you that it's not. One, the bill is
Mm-hmm.
not short. It is kind of broad based, which is typical
Mm-hmm.
of this bird's family, but it's not very short. It tends to be a little bit longer, maybe a little decurved. And that tail is very long, and the whole impression of the bird is much more kind of lanky, elongated.
Yep.
Whereas sparrows are much more, even when they have long tails, like song sparrow or white-throated sparrow, they're very chunky in the body, kind of big and round. Whereas this bird is kind of long and stretched out,
Yeah, and
and it's
you know
mostly
the
black.
exception to that would be the towhees, which are kind of long
Yeah,
sparrows.
yeah, those are long
Um,
sparrows. Yeah,
but yeah, and that's where you were going there. Is that now in this case, it's really kind of a stunning bird because it's mostly black with that
yeah.
bright kind of chestnut brown back,
Mhm.
and
Yeah, but it doesn't have a red wing. But it is a red-winged blackbird, even
it is a
without the red
red-winged
wing.
blackbird.
It's kind
And
of
this
a
bird is
chestnut
transitioning.
winged blackbird. Yeah.
This is
You
a young bird transitioning.
Yeah, I was gonna say, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, but is this one of those birds where the feather tips, the pale feather tips, wear off and make it shinier black, or is this a bird that actually loses those brown feathers and
You know,
grows in a whole new set of shiny black feathers? I
I
can't remember.
believe that that is correct. The first thing that it's the tips that wear off that give us the
Yeah,
black. But I am not sure. That's something I did not look into
yeah.
before we started up here.
I vaguely remember hearing something. I know that's pretty common for blackbirds in general. And
Now
anything with sort of that glossy iridescent plumage, they
just
they
to
wear
go ahead.
they wear the tips when they don't need to look good, and then by the time that they do need to look good, the tips are worn off and they look amazing.
Yeah, and house sparrow is the most
Yeah, that's
common
right.
bird that has that molt strategy or molt type. They only molt once a year, and so
Hmm.
when you see them in September, the house sparrows are in their what you would call finest plumage because it's all brand new and fresh.
Hmm.
And then over the course of the winter and spring, all the brown tips wear off, and the male house sparrow then has the nice black throat and
Yeah, snow buntings do that, and
yeah.
European starling. There's a number of birds that do that.
Yep.
It's a
And
neat
I just
strategy.
want to, Rob Fanning, going back to the Scop, says most guides show purple sheen for the lesser Scop,
Did I say
and
greater?
green for, wait, that's backwards. Green is lesser, and
Green is greater. Purple is lesser.
purple is lesser. Right. That's just
Yeah,
my dyslexia kicking in.
they are.
But,
I
but
mean,
just
they're both terrible. They're both not good field marks, but yeah.
They're not, and the reason for that is, you touched on it a little bit, but those colors are structural. They're not pigment,
Hmm.
and they are entirely dependent upon the angle of the light in relation to the angle of the viewer.
Right.
And you can watch a duck like this. You get on Google and search up mallard, male mallard, and you will find thousands of pictures of beautiful male mallards with the green head, just like the field guide shows. But about
Hmm.
every, I don't know, 30th bird will have a purple head,
Yeah. Huh.
and it's the same bird, but it's just the angle is different and it changes the color, the impression of the color.
That's interesting. I think green and purple are especially susceptible to that sort of thing. There's something about
Absolutely,
green and purple structure that those are the two that kind of switch back and forth.
yeah. And I mean, another just fantastic example of that is the
Common
gorgeous
grackle.
of well, that and the gorgeous of hummingbirds. I mean,
Yeah.
when the light is right, the ruby-throated hummingbird or any hummingbird, the gorget just explodes with color. But when they turn sideways, it's black.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let's go out west.
All right. Before we take this, I will just say, if anyone has any questions that are not related to the birds that we have, or just kind of general birding, whatever questions, please let us know in the comments. We are here. We're keeping an eye on what's going on. We are on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. If you have any questions, please let us know. And yes, so let's go on. Speaking of grackle and blackbirds in general, and Western biases, non-Western biases, whole continent biases. Yeah, so California.
What is this little brown? Well, I don't know how little it is, but I mean, just judging by the rocks, it doesn't look all that big.
Yeah, and it definitely has that sort of very long, lanky appearance that we talked about with the previous bird, as well as that bill, which is thick-based but kind of long and decurved, which would put it in the same family.
Right. So, what we're talking about, we talk about shapes, and if I had a little more time, I would have put together a comp. But the blackbirds, the Icterid family blackbirds, the bill for the most part, and there's cowbirds are an exception to this. They look like they're kind of a finch bill or a sparrow bill that's been stretched a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good description.
And it doesn't fit for, once you get comfortable with sparrows and things like that, when you see a red-winged blackbird or this bird, which we haven't identified yet, it just doesn't look right. We've got this bird that's kind of overall grayish, brownish, just nondescript with a dark eye, and that kind of drawn out bill. And this is a female brewer's blackbird. And out in California, I think the brown-headed cowbird would be the only thing really that you would.
Yeah, I was going to say, the reasons this isn't a brown-headed cowbird. The main reason being that female brown-headed cowbirds typically have a whitish, pale chin. It's not always white. Sometimes it's kind of a grayish, sometimes tan, but it's always lighter than you definitely see in a bird like this. And of course, we talked about bill shape, such a great tool for this. Cowbird has the most sparrowy bill of any, well, except for maybe bobolink. But it's shorter and squatter and more like a sparrow. And actually, the whole body shape is a bit more like a sparrow too, because they didn't have a much shorter tail and kind of short wings too. But
and cowbirds tend to have a little more variation in the plumage. There's a little bit of streaking or a little bit of pattern or something going on.
Yeah, a lot of times when I see brewer's blackbirds, at least in the east, they tend to be a bit more gray than this bird. This is kind of a very richly plumaged brewer's blackbird, and maybe that's more indicative of the kind that you would see on the far west. That's typically the case. The Pacific Coast has the most kind of richly colored birds, and maybe the interior birds are a bit more gray, and those are the ones that we see. But yeah,
it could be, if Alvaro, if Alvaro is here, he might tell us it's a young male because that tail is kind of black, and I see the scapulars are a bit darker than the rest of the bird. So this could be a young male. It's slightly above my pay grade for today.
Yeah, certainly shape-wise and location-wise, it's a good shot for brewer's blackbird for sure.
Okay, let's stay out west. This is one of my favorite ducks.
Yeah,
and
we see them out east too.
I think, and again, Ted would come at us from the 30,000-foot view point of view here.
Why is this
exactly? Well, a lot of reasons. Ducks have short legs. They're powerful flyers. They tend to be kind of chunky like this, and we can see the bill, and the duck bill is pretty obvious. The bird on the right is one of our most easily identified sea ducks. That is, ducks that tend to stay out in the ocean or big bodies of water. And there is really no other bird except a very rare vagrant from Asia that is all black with a bright orange knob on the front of the face like that.
Yeah.
And this is a pair of black scoters.
Yep.
But the female, go ahead and talk about that female.
Sure. And I was just going to say the black scoter is a very common sea duck here on the East Coast as well, especially this time of year. When I was on the Outer Banks a couple weeks ago, I had a few flocks of them coming by, even though it's a little bit early for them to be coming by in huge numbers. But yeah, I mean, it's a big dark duck over the horizon. You typically can see the males with their orange bills. If you put your binoculars on it, it doesn't make it too difficult. What you really want to look for are those surf scoters mixed in that have big white patches on their faces. But yeah, the female black duck is one that will show up, female or young male black duck.
Black scoter.
Black scoter, not black duck, is the one that will show up in the interior part of the continent pretty frequently as well on large reservoirs. So if you're lucky enough to see that in like October, November. But the things that I'm looking for here is especially that head pattern, and it is pretty subtle, but it is, paler on the cheek, dark cap, kind of grayish brown on the cheek that goes all the way back to the neck. And, just that really heavy body. That's such a scoter thing, such a sea duck thing. It's just like really, really fat and with kind of a stocky look to it. That's this uniquely scoter.
Yeah. So now, looking at the basic pattern of the female there on the left with that dark cap and the pale cheek, there is another duck that is very frequently mistaken for black scoter, and that is the RuddyDuck. And so here is some RuddyDucks flying.
Come from?
Flying with it. Yeah, stand aside, Richard Crosley. I am in the house. And so you'll see that the basic kind of impression is the same, but because of the white cheek and the dark cap, and these are winter male RuddyDucks flying there with the female and male black scoter. Same kind of overall dark bird. The thing that you notice is that white cheek and the dark cap. But look at how slim the RuddyDuck is in comparison to that heavy-bodied scoter. And look at the size difference.
First thing I notice, the size difference in comparison, and even if you don't have them, compared like this, which is extremely useful, the RuddyDuck is a much bigger head in relation to its body. It's got this little tiny body and a massive head, whereas a scoter is the other way. It's got this massive body and these little tiny heads. And RuddyDuck is a stiff-tailed duck, so the tail is like sticking out quite a ways, and the feet are tucked up underneath. So it does give a much more elongated shape when you see it flying over the ocean or wherever, because RuddyDucks will be on the ocean sometimes.
Oh yeah, and on big lakes too, and but the when you see scoters, they generally fly low over the water in lines. You can get them, just a few birds or 100 or more, and they fly low to the water, and they kind of have just a steady wing beat, and they just plow right through the air. RuddyDucks have this kind of buzzy flight. They look like they're just barely keeping it all together, and they're going to crash into the water at any moment. And that, it's when you see ducks in flight like that, it's hard to get an accurate size impression, but just sort of interesting thing just to put it into perspective of how small a RuddyDuck is. Here's a common grackle flying with the RuddyDucks to scale.
Yeah.
RuddyDuck is a small duck.
It's a tiny duck. And another thing you kind of want to see is those, the big white cheek patch. It might look very different here, but a lot of times if the sun is behind you and you're looking out on the ocean at a flock of ducks, that white on the cheek patch of the black scoter, female black scoter, can look really, really white.
Oh yeah,
maybe not quite this white, but can look pretty pale.
So let's see, it's how are we doing on questions here? We've got some comments here from Mia McPherson, who says compact, and that's a good description of of RuddyDuck. And Stephen Williams points out the pointy tails, and that's another thing we mentioned here. Yep.
RuddyDucks remind me a lot of green-winged teal, too. Green-winged teal is another one of those very compact little ducks with the super buzzy wing beats that you can tell at a distance even without seeing a lot of other field marks. Like if you see a tight flock of little ducks flying over a marsh or an impoundment or whatever this time of year, pretty good bet they're green-winged teal.
Yeah, so I think that might be what we've got for birds for today. Unless people have, if you've got questions or comments, now is the time to pop them up.
Shoot them over to us. We're happy to take them. Stephen Williams asks, do female black scoters have the patch? All have the patch that extends onto a collar like this one? I would say generally, yeah. It tends to be a much bigger white patch than what you'd see on a RuddyDuck, which is really sort of limited to the cheek and the immediate area. Like the female black scoter will have it all the way onto the neck, and you can see this when it's sitting on the water as well. Like it'll have pale all the way down till it reaches the body.
Spencer England says, what was the last life bird both of you had?
So for me, it was a varied thrush that was hanging out at a yard in Cary, North Carolina, about an hour away that I chased last week.
Mine was so long ago, I can't remember exactly. It was probably in Texas or Florida. And I honestly, I could go look it up, but I honestly can't remember. It might have been Ferruginous pygmy owl.
That's a good one.
But yeah, I've been stuck birding at home a lot on the home turf. And when you've been birding on the home turf as long as I have,
you have to get
lifers
lucky.
are hard to get.
Yeah, and that's, I say, like that varied thrush was just one of those lucky things. You know, the Pacific Northwest is a part of the world I have not been to much, even though it's a fairly common bird up there. And we just happened to have one in North Carolina that was super easy. Like drive up to a house and look in the backyard easy. I always appreciate those.
You just jogged my memory. My last lifer was an ancient merlet in Puget Sound. I think 2-3 years ago. So Chris Hardy asks, sorry, we got to back up here. Whoa, look at all that stuff come in. Wow. That just kind of popped out of nowhere. Let's see here. Sometimes. Yeah. Suzanne Wagner says hers was the common cuckoo. Oh, good for you. That was a stunning bird.
It's a good bird.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people had that as a last lifer.
Range maps show zone-tailed hawk. This is from Stephen Williams. Range maps show zone-tailed hawks are rare for Southern California, but we are seeing them. It looks like they are, well, let's see, boy, that just popped up again. It looks like they are spotted here around now to February each year. But do you know what brings them up here? Boy, I don't have any actual data, but I'm just going to say that I would not be surprised if it was range, some kind of range expansion due to climate change, because that's happening with so many birds.
Yeah, and it wasn't that long ago that Swainson's hawk was a really unusual bird in like the California lowlands.
No, we're talking about zone-tailed.
Now they're coming back super. Yeah, I know, I'm getting there. But it's going to be that sort of thing. Birds, especially raptors, will move pretty quickly to take advantage of localized food sources, and I think it's probably what's happening with zone-tailed hawk. Whether it's related to climate change, I mean, that seems as good a bet as any. But it's hard to say on sort of the micro scale.
Chris Hardy says his last lifer was red crossbill. Awesome. This is a great year for them. All the winter finches. People who haven't been birding very long, get out and see those winter finches, because this year is an event like you might not see for another 10 years or more.
Although I will say, I talked to Matt Young, who is a researcher who does a lot of red crossbill stuff,
Oh yeah.
On the podcast. It just
Yep.
came out yesterday, and he said that because of the pandemic, the cone crops, the tree crops in Quebec and Ontario did not get treated with the pesticide that usually keeps the spruce bedworms from, essentially taking over. And so this already massive spruce bedworm invasion, I don't say it's not invasion, but already massive spruce bedworm what's the word I'm looking
Eruption.
for? I can't think of it. But there's a lot of eruption, for lack of a better word, is going to continue, and it will mean good things for Cape May warblers, Tennessee warblers, and winter finches like
evening grosbeaks in particular.
So we could have another couple good years for evening grosbeaks in the east because of the pandemic. So there's your COVID silver lining.
Let's see, Melanie Helton, sorry. And that one just jumped. What's the easiest way to differentiate between Cassins and house? And she's talking about finches here. The house finch is the common bird, and the house auklet, that would be a good one. That's a fairly detailed discussion that's best done with images, but I would best say that if you're looking at males, house finch gives an overall kind of reddish head, breast, but with brownish wing panel and back. Cassin's finch has a longer, pointier bill. House finch has a rounded culmen that gives the impression of a shorter bill, and the bill is shorter.
Kind of blunter,
But Cassin's finch is kind of an overall brownish bird with a bright red crown. And that bright red crown is what really stands out among house finch, purple finch, and Cassin's finch. Purple is going to be the most brightest colored overall. Again, we're talking about males. House finch is going to be in between, and the house finch has the biggest bill, and Cassin's is going to be the most brown looking with the bright red cap.
House finches just in general look the streaks are very diffuse, like they're very kind of blurry and indistinct and kind of bleh, like a watercolor that's bleeding into the rest of the painting. Whereas Cassin's finch is sort of like very, very pinstripe, very like freshly sharpened pencil sort of thing, like very fine streaking. And that's sort of what I look for when I'm, not that I see a lot of Cassin's finches in North Carolina, but that's sort of what stands out to me when I'm thinking about those two birds.
Marcia Balestri says, how about talking about the differences between the bean geese species? No, we're not going to do that.
Above my pay grade. Yeah.
No, it's
one of them's short and stocky, and one of them's longer, kind of lanky. Where you draw the line, I have no idea.
It's very difficult, and there's a lot of in between. And so, if you get a really classic, big, long taiga bean goose, or on the other end of the spectrum, a tundra bean goose that's not long with that long bill and a lot more orange on it, they can be pretty straightforward. But there's a whole lot of in between that takes a lot of photographs and a lot of time looking at that bird. And with our birds, they're all vagrants, and I think the bird that's being seen in Pennsylvania is it's interesting because most of the people who have seen it. And all the birders on this side of the pond seem to be saying that it is a tundra bean goose.
That's the consensus. Yeah.
But a couple of very prominent and very highly respected European birders felt that their first impression and what they're seeing is taiga. So
I have no idea.
There you go. And who knows? Maybe with more pictures, they've changed their opinion, because this was the last time I looked was when the bird was first being seen.
Yeah, most of the submissions to eBird are of tundra, but there are enough of taiga to cause you to question.
Chris Ortega has. We're not skipping you. But he just said that he tagged us in a gull, and We can't look at that right now
later.
because we're looking at ourselves in the monitors. So what's going to happen is we're going to go and find the post where you tagged us, and we'll comment there on it. But we can't pull it up and look at it now, unfortunately. But we will get to you on that. Ray Vetker, my lifer this year was pileated woodpecker. That's a stunning bird. That's one of my favorite. Go ahead.
I have a couple questions from YouTube that we can hit before we've been at this almost an hour, so we'll hit those real quick and then maybe call it a day because I have to prepare for a podcast thing pretty soon. So I'm not trying to push people down the road, but so anyway, some YouTube. Everardo Jamie Jr. asked, "What is the best way to help learn the distinction between sparrows?" I would say familiarity.
Yes. Yeah.
Getting comfortable with the regular ones.
Get comfortable with the regular ones. Spend time looking at them, but also get a good field guide like the Sibley Guide to Birds. And at night, when you're in bed, before you go to bed, just flip through and look at those pictures and look at those field marks and go back and forth through them and become familiar with them. That's really a good, at least for me, it's a good technique for staying on top of groups of birds that are similar that you don't see a lot of all the time. So you'll see your 2 or 3 sparrows, but then, there's 5 or 6 others that are in your area, but you don't see them all the time.
Right. Yeah, and with sparrows, we talk a lot about shape and behavior as being useful tools for identifying birds. And for sparrows, that's especially true. Take a look at your sparrows and look at the different genera, things like Spizella and Zonotrichia. Figure out what birds are in those. You can separate birds into those groups. Zonotrichia are the big, chunky, white-throated, white-crowned birds. Spizella are the kind of little bit lanky, more dainty chipping sparrow and things like that. And Melospiza, obviously, with song sparrow. Once you sort of separate them into these groups, then it makes it a little easier to pick out the ones, or at least you can narrow your focus a little bit and, maybe have a little more luck that way.
Absolutely.
Another question.
Okay.
Yeah, another question. Jacob Bagley might be taking a trip to Washington over the summer, hopes to get spotted owl. Is the ancient murrelet hard to see?
No, actually. I was, let me think of where I saw it. It was Port Townsend, which is if you get a chance to go to Port Townsend, it's a ferry ride across from Seattle. It is a beautiful little town. And there's a state park at the end of the point there, Fort something or other, and just standing there on the point. Now, what time of the year are we talking about?
Summer.
Ooh, summer. I don't know what the summer range of that species is. Let's take a quick look here because I saw mine in winter, and it was quite easy from that state park. Just there were hundreds and hundreds of them out in the channel. But
winter is generally a better time of year to get those alcids offshore, just because
summertime
more out there.
Boy, the summer range no, it doesn't. Summertime, you're not going to see. We're talking about ancient murrelet. Is that correct?
Was ancient. Yeah, the ancient.
Yeah, one. You're not going to see ancient murrelet in summertime in Washington State.
You'll have to
now,
go back.
Having said that, check the local listservs, and you can do that. The Tweeters listserv is at ABA Birding News, just birding.aba.org. Sometimes these birds hang around in the summer, so check eBird, check the listservs, and you might find one that you can go see that's just hanging around in the summer. Any other questions?
That's about it. Otherwise,
okay,
I think
so,
we're good to call it a day.
We're not quite. This is the time of year and time of the program where we're going to go all public television on you. This is what we do every day. And if you enjoy what we do, like this program or the What's This Bird group or the ABA podcast, which is just phenomenal that Nate hosts, or any of the things we do, please consider a donation to the ABA. We have a fundraising drive going on to keep the lights on, and keep us producing material. And we're a small, strappy group of people. We're not a big organization in a big office building somewhere. We're all working from home. There's about a dozen of us that churns out all this stuff, and we work long hours because we love it, and we hope that shows. And if you enjoy it, please consider joining or throwing a donation our way. We would really, really appreciate it.
aba.org/gift.
All right, I think that does it for us today.
Yep. See y'all.
All right,
next
take
time.
it easy, Nate. Bye.